So the next thing that we need to talk about is multiplying and dividing integers. The first thing it's really important that you understand is what that negative sign means. A negative sign means the opposite of whatever number you're looking at. So in other words, if we saw -1, if we find -1 on our number line, that's one place away from 0. That's simply the opposite of +1, because +1 is also 1 unit away from 0, but in the opposite direction. So -1 means the opposite of 1. That is a 1. I know it doesn't quite look like a 1. Let's try that again, of 1. There we go. And then we have, what does -3 mean? Well, that's a kind of a funny thing to see. So -3 is here on the number line. -3. Well, if -3 is here and it goes from 0 to here, and I know that this other negative gives me the opposite of that -3, and I now know that I'm going in the other direction, 3 units. So really, that's the opposite of 3, or +3. And the other thing to keep in mind is absolute value. We've kind of already been talking about absolute value when we were talking about the opposite, but they are definitely not the same. Please do not confuse them and think that the opposite means absolute value, because it does not. The absolute value of a number is its distance from 0. So if, for example, I look at this absolute value, and those are absolute value bars, just so you know, to indicate that we're finding the absolute value of -2. I find -2, and I say, how far is 2 from 0? Well, it's 2 units, so it's 2. And then if I look at +2, I find +2 on my number line. How far is +2 from 0? Also 2 units. So they are both the same distance from 0. You can consider them as being +2 because, in fact, it is positive. We don't typically write the positive sign there. But if you think about it, a distance cannot be negative. The negative tells us the direction it goes in. So the absolute value is never negative. Because it's a distance, and specifically the distance from 0. Okay, so this slide has our steps for multiplying and dividing integers. Make sure you write down all these steps in your notebook. You're going to first find the absolute values of the integers, multiply and or divide as usual. Looks like Mrs. De Silva left an E out there. I'll put that right in there. That is an E, divide as usual. Count the number of negative signs, and then an even number of negative signs means that answer is positive. An odd number means it's negative. If we take that and we do some examples, first one I've got is -22 divided by +2. Don't forget that that fraction bar also means to divide, because really a fraction is a division of something larger. So I take my absolute value of -22. I know that that's 22. My absolute value of +2 is 2. I divide those as usual. My answer is 11. And then I count up the number of negative signs. There's 1, so therefore my answer is -11. Moving right along, I've got -10 times -3. I find the absolute value of both of these. The absolute value of -10 is 10. The absolute value of -3 is 3. 10 times 3 is 30. I count my negative signs. I've got 1, 2. That's an even number. And therefore, it's +30. Next, I've got +42 divided by -7. I find those absolute values. The absolute value of positive 42 is 42. I divide that by the absolute value of negative 7, which is 7. 42 divided by 7 is 6. I count up my negative signs. There's 1, so therefore my answer is negative 6. And then finally, I've got positive 13 times negative 2. I find those absolute values. The absolute value of positive 13 is 13 times negative 2, or the absolute value of negative 2, sorry, which is 2. 13 times 2 is 26. I count up my negative signs. There's only 1. My answer is negative 26. Next, we've got some practice problems. Please stop the video, do these on your own, and come back and check your work. Okay, so hopefully you did try these on your own. We'll start with the first one here, negative 100 divided by positive 5. I find the absolute value of both of those. The absolute value of negative 100 is 100 divided by the absolute value of positive 5, which is 5. I do my regular division. 100 divided by 5 is 20. I count my negative signs. There's only 1. My answer is negative 20. Next, I've got negative 9 divided by negative 6. I find my absolute values. Absolute value of negative 9 is 9 times the absolute value of negative 6, which is 6. 9 times 6 is 54. I count my negative signs. There's 2 of them, so that's positive 54. Next, I've got positive 30 divided by negative 5. Find my absolute values. Absolute value of positive 30 is 30 divided by negative 5, which is 5. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5. 30 divided by 5 is 6. I count my negative signs. There's only 1. My answer is negative 6. And finally, my last one, I've got positive 11 times negative 11. I find my absolute values. The absolute value of positive 11 is 11. The absolute value of negative 11, also 11, because they are the same distance from 0 on the number line. They have the same absolute values. 11 times 11 is 121. How many negative signs do I have? I've got 1, so therefore my answer is negative 121. And there you go. That's multiplying and dividing integers.